Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming to today's webinar, Lead with Empathy, your master key for unlocking and driving human and organizational potential. Your presenter today is Amanda Price. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, I kindly ask that you type them in the chat box, and we will address as many as we can at the end of the webinar. We also encourage all participants to complete the survey afterward. Your feedback is greatly appreciated. If you would like a PDF copy of the presentation or the webinar recording, please contact us at webinars@omnex.com. Amanda Price is a conflict and communication skills coach and trainer with Quality Support Group. She helps individuals and organizations strengthen communication, build trust, and navigate conflict with confidence and empathy. With over 18 years of HR leadership experience in the high-tech industry, including at Juniper Networks, Amanda has led initiatives in culture transformation, leadership development, and team effectiveness. A certified trainer with the Center for Nonviolent Communication, Amanda is passionate about rehumanizing workplaces by placing empathy and authentic communication at the heart of collaboration. Now, without further ado, please welcome Amanda.
Thank you so much, Andrew, and welcome everyone. Andrew, I'd like to thank you and the Omnex team for hosting today's webinar. And I'm thrilled to have participants here who are interested in this topic, which is certainly near and dear to my heart. Let me just remind you, please use the chat function to enter your questions, and I'll address them in the last 10 to 15 minutes of the webinar. And I say it's probably time to get started, so let's dive in. So why have we gathered here today? It is my goal to help you achieve the following objectives. The first being an ability to gain an understanding of why empathy is not just a nice to have. It really is an actual essential leadership skill. I also am hoping to enable you to recognize the ways in which the power of empathy presents itself at work, as well as dispel some misconceptions and learn to avoid some roadblocks that really get in the way of empathy flowing. And I also hope that you can come away from today's webinar with some practical strategies to drive your leadership of empathy right away. So let me ask you something. When was the last time you had the experience of being truly gotten? And I don't mean someone just intellectually understanding what you're trying to communicate, but rather something bigger, truly a way of being heard and understood and seen for what's most important to you. And who was that gave you that gift? It truly is a gift, you know, a choice that someone made to truly open their hearts and their minds and their ears to you. Now, I'm guessing at least some of you may be thinking that this is the stuff of personal relationships, close family and friends, but not appropriate for the workplace. In fact, one could say that this is especially not useful as a leadership practice. I hear it all the time. Empathy, are you kidding? If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Or, listen, we've got a job to do. We're not therapists. Or even, our problem is that we are too nice. We have to stop letting our employees and our customers walk all over us. And you know what? I get it. I empathize with you. There will always be people that will test our boundaries. And that's why healthy boundaries are vital. But if I may be so bold, in the next 50 minutes or so, I ask you to set aside your opinions, your preconceptions, your experiences, and just listen with openness and curiosity. Take in my assertion that empathy does, in fact, have a crucially important role to play in our work lives, and especially in our leadership. Andrew, thank you for launching this first poll. Right? So I'd like to hear from you. On average, how often do you have this experience that I just talked about of being truly, fully seen, heard, and understood by someone at work? I'll just wait and see. Give you a few seconds to select your choice. You may select one choice in this poll. Regularly, monthly, weekly. All right, terrific. Thank you, Andrew, for closing the poll. We've got just two choices here, and I'm thrilled to see that we've got over 50% of you who experience that sense of really being gotten, regularly on a weekly basis, right? Second coming in at a monthly basis, just under 50%. Well, I'd like to share a true story about someone that I met who very likely would have selected that last option in the poll, which is, are you kidding? Let's take the logistics worker who attended one of my corporate workshops. I'll call him Jake. We had an odd number of people in the classroom that day, so I offered to pair up with him to do a pairs breakout exercise. And it was an exercise in listening. Partner A was to briefly describe a real-life concern or unfortunate situation that they were experiencing at work. Partner B was tasked simply to actively listen until Partner A was done. Then Partner B was instructed to recap, to reflect back simply what they heard their partner share about their story and their concern. I guess that Jake was nervous, at least not too excited to be paired with the facilitator. He looked down at his shoes and was moving a little more slowly than the others in the classroom who were finding places in various tables and nooks to conduct their exercise. Nevertheless, he agreed to do it, and we started out with him sharing his story about his concern. He said he was getting sick and tired of a common occurrence based on his role, and specifically, it was that they had an investigative process when shipments went wrong, when mistakes were made, that of course impacted customers. And that process always began with him. And logically, he understood that because of the nature of this role, it made sense for him, for the process to start with him before anyone else that was involved later on in the shipping process. The concern Jake had, though, as he described, wasn't necessarily with the fact that it always started with him, but it was the attitude of the investigating manager who conducted those inquiries. Rather than kicking them off in the spirit of curiosity and objectivity, something akin to, all right, let's figure this out. Instead, the manager approached Jake with an attitude of blame and accusation every time he started the investigation, as if Jake was already guilty and had to prove himself as innocent each time. Jake went on to explain that in all cases, the shipping mistake did not start with him. So there was little to zero reason for that investigating manager to point an accusatory finger at him when he started. When Jake finished speaking, I asked him if he was feeling frustrated and really wanting the investigator to give him the benefit of the doubt. Was he wanting the manager to trust that together they'd find the root cause of the problem without prematurely pointing that accusatory finger, that blaming? And maybe would Jacob appreciated the investigator actually recognizing that he wanted to be a part of the solution and was committed to that, as opposed to regarding him with suspicion? Taking in my reflection and my guesses about what he was feeling and what was most important to him, I noticed Jake's body language and his tone of voice shift dramatically. His shoulders softened, he leaned back against his chair and nodded. He said, "Yeah, that's it, you got it." He looked at me and smiled and actually thanked me for listening to him the way that I did. And it's worth noting that this customer at the time was literally suffering from an all-time high turnover issue. According to another participant in that workshop, it had sadly become a joke that they were willing to hire anyone with a pulse so long as they were able to and willing to show up at their shifts on time, which was another big issue that they had. But regrettably, the investigating manager never attended our leadership, communication, or conflict management workshops. So I'll never know if Jake addressed his concerns directly with that manager. I also don't know if Jake ended up leaving the company, perhaps possibly feeling disgruntled and imagining that he had been treated unfairly. What I do know is in those last few minutes that we had together during that listening exercise, Jake really had the experience of being fully seen, heard, and gotten by me. And he really appreciated it. Now, imagine if that investigating manager had been willing to take 5 minutes to really hear Jake out and to listen to him the way that I did. My guess is that would have enhanced his awareness of his impact on Jake and maybe others, as well as having gotten a lot more cooperation, and maybe even with Jake's help, had been able to improve the process altogether to reduce or eliminate those issues with the shipping. Right? That day, I modeled empathic presence and listening with Jake. And now I'm going to ask you to stretch your own empathy muscles a bit and imagine what could have been going on for that investigating manager. What might he have been feeling, and what could have been most important to him in those interactions with Jake? So, Andrew, thank you for launching that second poll. Please take a minute, and you're welcome to select as many choices as you can about what may have been going on for that investigating manager.
Amanda, I accidentally set this up as a single choice, so they
Oh,
can choose
that's
a single
okay.
choice and then.
Okay.
But yes.
We'll see what happens. That's fine. Another few seconds. And of course, you don't have any of the details. You can't ask that manager what was going on with him, and that's okay. Just taking the time to attempt to figure out what might be going on for that person, what that person's true experience was, is an empathic practice. So Andrew, go ahead and please close out that poll, and we'll see what some of the choices, these guesses might be. Okay, all right. So we have essentially a tie at 33% between feeling exasperated and needing competency, right, capability, and feeling impatient and needing progress, needing forward motion, right? We got to get this done. We also had a couple of choices in feeling confused, needing clarity, such as, what the heck is going on, as well as feeling some anxiousness, perhaps even a little bit of fear, and needing some security, knowing that this is going to be all right. Thank you so much for participating in this poll. So next I'm going to cover a little bit of grammar to make sure that we're fully aligned in terms of the working definitions associated with this topic, right? The what. So let's start with empathy. Empathy at its most core is a respectful understanding of another person's whole experience. Right? And when we bring it into the leadership realm, we talk about it as an approach to leadership, which really emphasizes authentic human connection, a willingness and a curiosity to understand, and to respect what's most important at the individual level, the team level, at the interpersonal level, and for the organization at large. So now, having gone over these working definitions, the what, part of the what, let's move into a bit of the why. Why is leading with empathy important? I invite you to read what Randy Conley from Blanchard describes, which is really about not lowering our standards, but really understanding the challenges that you and your teams and your organization and your customers are facing, while at the same time holding everyone to their full potential. See, incorporating empathy into your leadership approach helps leaders better understand the full nature of what's going on and at the same time supports them. Right? It's not a sucker's choice. And empathy does play an essential role for leaders around the world who are attempting to navigate so much uncertainty, disruption, talent and supply inconsistencies, security threats, and economic uncertainty. So let's go over some research findings to bear this out. The following patterns of findings have emerged from a review of various fresh research on high versus low empathy organizations. In one research study, 76% of respondents who experienced empathy from their leaders reported that they were highly engaged, in contrast to only 32% who experienced less empathy. In another study, they found that when empathy was incorporated and introduced into decision-making, it increased cooperation as well as inspired people to be empathic themselves. Empathy really does breed more empathy. Leading with empathy also serves as an antidote, a remedy for declines in retention, overall employee well-being, and performance and competency shortfalls that, of course, also impact customers and the bottom line. Results from the 2025 State of Workplace Empathy Study revealed that employees who experience their workplace as lacking empathy report 3 times higher toxicity in their cultures, which is another major issue. They also experience 1 1/3 more mental health issues. For example, 61% of respondents experienced mental health issues and suffered from burnout, as compared to only 45% from higher empathy workplaces. Just think about how these poor culture and increasing mental health issues impact all of these factors here that you see on the screen. And let's take and pull a thread here about one of those increases that we see in high empathy organizations, that being innovation. One study revealed that people who reported a high empathy workplace said that they were 61% more likely to be able to engage in innovation, as compared to only 13% who reported a welcoming of innovation in lower empathy organizations. So just think about that gap for a moment, 61% versus 13% when it came to the ability, the willingness, the support to engage in innovation. And I'll share a case study. Let's take Satya Nadella, the chairman and CEO of Microsoft. Take a look at what he has to say about empathy. When Satya took over Microsoft in 2014, one of the very first things that he did was distribute copies of a book called Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg to all of his senior leadership. At the time, Microsoft's company culture, particularly across the highest levels of leadership, was described as highly toxic. So he took it upon himself to lead the charge towards improving it. And one of the first things he did was to inspire his senior staff to lead with empathy. In fact, a business article published by Inc. heralded the book by Rosenberg that Satya gave to his staff as the one book that transformed Microsoft's culture from cutthroat to creative. For those of you unfamiliar with nonviolent communication, it's a communication process and approach that prioritizes honesty, authenticity, and courage, and that is grounded in and springs from empathy. Nadia's emphasis on leading with empathy and in viewing that in his culture not only improved collaboration, the quality of the overall culture and the cooperation amongst his management and employee base at large, but it also impacted the impression of the company's market brand. So we've covered a bit of the what and the why. Let's take a look at and dive into the how. What does leading with empathy look like? What do we do? I would say the most important element of empathy is full presence. It's attentiveness. When you are interacting with someone, giving them your full presence as opposed to being distracted by your phone, your laptop, ideas in your mind about what you need to do next or what's not working, but really just truly being fully there with someone. And it's also about making time to be able to do that, making space to have those conversations, those enriching interactions. It's also about self-connection and resourcefulness. And what I mean by that is paying attention and taking care of ourselves to ensure that we're fully resourced, knowing how we're doing, what we're needing, what's most important to us. Another element of empathy is setting aside any judgments or evaluations or diagnoses or criticisms that may be conjuring up when you're listening to somebody else. It's that skill of putting those judgments aside and really just being there and listening to that other person. And of course, that's closely paired with a general sense of care and curiosity. If we don't have that care and curiosity, then whatever we listen to may be going in and out of our ears. So I talked about that quality of listening when I shared with you that story about Jake. That's another element. And finally, it's about respect and consideration for the whole experience of an individual. What's most important, what their values are, what they need, and how they're doing. Andrew, if you're willing to launch the third poll, I'm going to ask participants to weigh in once again. Which of these traits and behaviors do you wish to develop and improve? And I'm not sure if you can select more than one or just one with this. Andrew, do you know how you did that?
This one you can select more than one. Yeah.
All right, terrific. So please select as many as you wish. We'll give it a few more seconds, and then we'll see what's going on. All right. So of these traits, these behaviors, let's see, Andrew, what people are reporting as what's important to them in their development journey. All right, we've got answers from selected from each and every option. That's great. With the highest around respect and consideration for feelings, for values and needs at 71%. Then we see coming in at 57% self-connection and resourcefulness. That is a real hurdle for so many leaders, right? You're so busy and focused on serving the needs of others, of your employees, of your vendors, of your customers, of your clients, as well as everyone in your personal life. It can be really hard to prioritize time to take care of yourself. We also had curiosity at 43%. That willingness to set aside and be really interested in what's going on for the other. That full presence and attentiveness, again, it's very challenging in today's environment where we find ourselves multitasking and so many things pulling our attention away from being truly just with another person. Right? Terrific. Thank you for participating in the poll. Let's move on. So let's move into some myth busting. I said earlier that there are a lot of misconceptions floating about empathy. So I would like to set the record straight about the quality of empathy that I'm describing here in this webinar. So first, empathy is not weakness or over permissiveness. And I know that is a very common opinion of empathy, particularly when people think about it in a workplace. But that is not what I'm talking about. And that's what Randy Conley, in the quote I shared with you earlier from Blanchard, also highlighted, that it's not about lowering standards. Here's another big one: agreement. Oftentimes we think if we're truly being with someone, listening to them without judgment or while we're suspending judgment, that we must agree with them. And that is absolutely not the case. What is the case is that we remain curious, that we suspend our judgment for the time being, and that we engage with just true consideration and acknowledgement for what that other person's experience is. But empathy is not agreement. Another myth I hear a lot is the approach of avoiding or having conversations, feedback, constructive feedback, because people are afraid of hurting others' feelings. So instead, they choose to be nice. What I would offer is that being nice, particularly artificially nice, is actually the opposite of empathy, because we're not showing up authentically when we sugarcoat or we outright avoid having conversations that we know are meaningful, but that we are avoiding. In fact, expressing ourselves honestly can be one of the kindest things that we can do for people, even if we imagine that our message is unwelcome, might be unwelcome. The key here is to communicate and use language that promotes human connection, even when the subject matter is tough. Another myth I'd like to highlight is that it does not presume that we need to fully absorb or mimic another person's emotions or feelings. In fact, if we did do that, we'd likely be unable to get out of bed every morning if we took on the world's feelings, the world's emotions. Now, from time to time, you may be inspired. You may feel something similar to what someone else is sharing and what their experience is. And that's fine. That's great. That's human. That's human to human connection. But it is not a prerequisite, and certainly not advisable, that we fully take on what others are experiencing. The last myth that I'd like to share is about the perception that empathy is really about manipulation. And I would refer to that as false empathy. In fact, it's people who often have the least amount of empathic skill, whether it's natural or learned, which empathy can be indeed learned, that approach with this false empathy. So, of course, we need to be mindful. We need to discern whether or not people are trying to manipulate us if they are engaging with us empathically. But that is not what I'm inviting here for you. So I do want you to take this list to heart, as one or more of these misconceptions often discourage people from valuing and practicing true life-enriching empathy. And in addition to these myths, there are many internal habitual behaviors and reactions that we humans have developed that obstruct the flow of empathy, which I refer to as roadblocks. Others manifest in our external environment where we may have less control or influence. So, of the dozens of roadblocks that exist, I'd like to highlight just a couple. One of them is when we listen to respond as opposed to listen to understand. When we listen to respond, as we are listening, our attention is already being somewhat pulled away to think about how we are going to next engage in the conversation as soon as it's our turn. I like to think of the metaphor of a ping pong game, right? We're ready to hit that next ball as soon as it comes over the net, rather than a game of backyard catch, where we've got our glove, we're looking at the person about to throw the ball, and then we get it into our hands, and we take a moment, we take a pause to really take in what it was that that person said and what their experience was before we throw that ball back and express ourselves. And this oh so common habitual behavior of immediately replying with our own reactions moves the spotlight of attention from the speaker to us, which causes disconnection. So here's what this could sound like. Let's say that the employee Alice asks to speak to her manager and starts talking about the discomfort and dismay that she's experiencing about a new workflow process that is really slowing down her work and that doesn't seem to be adding any value. When Alice pauses, her manager quickly replies, "It can't be as bad as you're describing." Or, "Clearly, you don't understand how much more efficient your work will be once you follow the process correctly. You must be doing something wrong." Alice's manager's reactions, the first minimizing and the second critiquing and advising or educating, deflated the conversation. It literally took the life out of it and disconnected them. A second common roadblock to empathy is overuse of demand language. Now, of course, in organizations, there will always be people who wield legitimate authority over others due to the nature and structure of the business. I get it. And when people rely too heavily on their authority as a means of power over influence to get people to do things and make demands more often than is really necessary, their subordinates will likely respond in one or two ways, either submission or rebellion. When people submit, what that means is they give up or they give in. If they rebel, they're saying, heck no. Both of these responses come at a cost to long-term trust, goodwill, cooperation, and collaboration. So as you think about different roadblocks to empathy and your use of demand language, telling people what they must do without choice, without collaboration, think about that impact. And while I don't really have time to go into this in this particular webinar, I'll also note the risk to human connection and empathy that's posed by the fast-paced proliferation of AI, right? Now, there are incredible opportunities that we are already enjoying with AI, and I invite you to keep in mind what impact that might have when it comes to human workplace relationships. So let's pivot now to a couple of practical takeaways that you can start right now to lead with empathy. We talked earlier about one of those elements of empathy being self-connection and resourcefulness. The first practice that I'm going to introduce to you is one of self-empathy, and I do that for a good reason, right? The more we practice empathy with ourselves, the more capable we'll be of showing up empathically for others. It's akin to what flight attendants say when they're going through their safety protocols before takeoff, right? Put on your own oxygen mask before attempting to assist anyone else with theirs. And in this particular self-empathy exercise, I invite you to use, I'm inviting you to harness that space between stimulus and response, rather than, as I described before in one of those roadblocks to empathy, immediately react to what people are sharing. Because there is that freedom and that choice and that autonomy and that discernment that we can connect to when we notice the space between that stimulus, that trigger, and what our response will be. So step one of the self-empathy practice is simply to notice that you're moving into reactive energy. And that reactive energy might look like your heart racing, your face or neck starting to get warm, maybe your hands shaking, or a sense that you want to jump out of your chair and leave the room. Another really good indicator that you're switching from more of your centered, grounded self into reactivity is your mind flooding with ideas of judgment and evaluation of the other person. That's a really good indicator that you have moved into that reactive energy. So the first step is just notice it. When you start to have those kinds of body sensations, those reactions, that mind flooding, right? And we stop, we pause, and we breathe. I love this quote from Jefferson Fisher, who is the author of the book, The Next Conversation. Let your breath be your next word. Just take a moment. Breathing is the easiest, it's free, and it can do absolute wonders for our ability to calm down and to regain emotional regulation. Step 3 is name it to tame it. Observe your feelings. Name them, even if you're doing so silently. As you're taking a few deep breaths, recognize, oh, I'm feeling so frustrated. I'm feeling so upset. I'm feeling so irritated. Again, putting a name, a label to our feelings continues to help us regain centeredness and composure. Step 4 is to move from what you don't like, what's bugging you so much, to what it is that is really important to you, that you do value. And in my next webinar on conflict management, I use this as a title, right? Flipping from ugh to aha. And we use it here as well. We flip from what we don't like I can't believe they're blaming us for this, to ah. This is reminding me how important trust, transparency, and cooperation is. So it's about moving to what you don't like, what that stimulus was, to what you value most, what you need. And getting clear on that can make all the difference. Once you have gained that clarity about what's most important to you, then you respond, connected to your intention. And your intention may be just to finish the conversation, to get through, to be heard, to be understood, perhaps to really get a better idea of what's going on for that other person. But staying connected to that intention in your response allows you to regain that centeredness, that composure, and that ability to re-engage with reasoned, empathic dialogue. The second empathy practice that I would like to introduce to you is about gratitude. And I'm not talking about praising or complimenting people. I'm referring to true expression of thanks. You see, where gratitude flows, empathy grows, right? So right now, I ask you to think about someone at work that did or said something that you really appreciated. So this is an activity I'm going to ask you to do right now. Think about someone for whom you are very grateful. Okay. Once you have that clarity, the first step is simply to describe specifically what that person did or said. What was their action or their behavior? And stick to the facts, just like you are often advised to provide feedback by using specifics. It's the same thing here. So try to eliminate any judgments, compliments, praising of their character, of who they are. Really lean into what exactly it was that they did or said. That will enable them to really understand and be able to replicate it in the future. It's that difference between great job and, that report that you delivered to the board made all the difference in how they were willing to discuss and eventually say yes to our request. Step 2 is to share the impact of their actions and their behaviors. It could be that you experienced a sense of relief, of confidence, gratitude, appreciation, happiness, inspiration, hope. So make note of what it was that they did specifically and what the impact was, how it made you feel. How was that like for you? And thirdly, describe what it was that they did which helped either meet a value or fulfill a need that you had. For example, it could have been meeting a need for trust, for transparency, competency, and excellence, for cooperation or collaboration, consideration. What was it? What was most important to you that they helped contribute to? So here's an example of what an empathic expression of gratitude might sound like. When I heard you say in the meeting that you'll volunteer to join our new project team, I felt grateful and relieved because I trust that your expertise and your collaboration skills will elevate the likelihood of the team's and the overall project's results. Very simple, a short paragraph, but I was specific, I named the impact, and I identified what need it was that they contributed to, of mine and the team's and the project's. You see, when you express gratitude in this way, it also touches into people's internal, intrinsic motivation, as opposed to expressions of compliments and praise, which, while is always nice to hear in the short term, that really breeds that external motivation where their self-esteem, their sense of competency is reliant on the approval and the feedback from others. And that's a cycle that is important to break. So I challenge you in the next 48 hours to express your gratitude to that person that you chose, ideally during a live conversation, so that you can see the reaction that they have when you express your gratitude in this way. So it's time now to recap the highlights of what I covered in today's webinar. First being that empathy-infused businesses really do thrive, both internally and externally, from a market standpoint, as well as that internal culture. And when we approach our leadership with a priority of human connection and understanding and respect for what's most important, that's what then also allows that culture and that business to thrive. And it's about we ourselves, it's about our interpersonal relationships, the us, and the we all together, the organization at large. We also want to be very careful about preconceptions and the habits, as well as the external conditions that might get in the way of the flow of empathy, and to see what we can do to mitigate or minimize or avoid those altogether. My hope is I gave you some insight to do that today. And empathy is about how we show up, both as far as what we do, what activities, what actions we take, as well as how we are. What is our presence? What is our quality of presence and attention? It's about both the being and the doing. And lastly, I invite you to start today. Begin with yourself, right? Self-empathy then leads to our ability and our capacity to engage empathically with others and to cultivate a culture of gratitude. The more you can bring in this gratitude, we call it empathy juice, right? Empathy breeds more empathy, and gratitude lays a foundation for that to really flourish. Before we move into Q&A, I would once again like to thank Andrew and the team over at Omnex for sponsoring this webinar today. Thank you, as well as a big round of thanks to the participants who are still with us today. And I hope that over at QSG and Growth Co, we would love to hear from you and love to partner with you. We have trainings and workshops, we do coaching and consulting, and we partner with clients on a very contextualized level. So we're really there to address what is most important and to you. With that, Andrew, I believe we can move over to seeing if there are any questions.
Yeah, there is one question.
Okay.
And the question is there any study about increase and decrease items?
Increase and decrease items. I worry I'm not exactly sure what that means. Increase and
Yeah, there's
decrease
not
items.
no
Um,
context there.
yeah. If Salim is still around, if there's any way he might clarify that, I would be in a better position to answer that. I regret I don't exactly understand what that means.
Okay, I can allow him to talk. Salim, if you're here, you can ask your question directly.
Yes, in the first slide, you have the increase and decrease of empathy. So we have some items there. I think slide number business impact.
The business impact. So
Yeah,
are there any studies about
so
increases?
increases in there are several items there. Say overall performance and moral innovation, customer satisfaction, all these items, and the decrease in chronic stress and anxiety, mental health and issues, and other risk factors. All these items.
Yes.
But is there, and those are actually the impact. So this impact issue, how it works. So is there any study that, okay, business impact increase by innovation, the customer satisfaction. So there is any study for that? So customer satisfaction increase. So
Yes.
trust. That's what I'm asking.
Yes. Yeah, there are a variety of studies that have addressed various components of what you just described.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were to even Google a question about any of those specifics, I'm sure that you could come up with a fair amount of information. And Andrew, I'm not sure if there's a way that I could even offer some links to studies following the webinar that might
Yeah,
support Salim's interest.
if you want to send me over stuff in response to the webinar, I'll send out maybe some additional items that you want to share with them, or we can actually add them into the slides before I share. That could also be a way
Okay.
that we can, get them across. So yeah, we can definitely address that.
Terrific. I appreciate your question, Salim. So keep an eye out for that, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. All right.
I think I don't see any other questions up on the Q&A. But again, if anyone has any additional questions, you can also, reach out to Amanda directly or reach out to me and I can connect you to Amanda as well. And we'll be sending across some additional materials after the webinar. And please make sure that you also fill out the survey. We appreciate the feedback and it helps us, improve our process as well. So I think with that being said, thank you very much, Amanda, for the informative webinar, and we look forward to working with you further on additional webinars in the future.
My pleasure, Andrew. Thank you so much, and thank you all for attending. May you
Okay.
lead with
Thanks.
empathy.
Okay, bye-bye.